1095th meeting of the Security Council is called to an order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is identical letters dated January 19, 2016, from the Permanent Representative of Colombia to the United Nations addressed to the Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, S/2016/53. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Miroslav Jenka, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, to participate in this meeting. It's so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration for the item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw your attention, the Council members, to document S/2025/849, the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia. I now give the floor to Mr. Miroslav Jenka.
Mr. President, it is a pleasure to address the Security Council at the start of a new year of opportunity for Colombia to keep advancing with the constructive support of the Council toward the lasting peace that its people so deserve. Es un honor estar aquí con...
It's an honor to be here with Mauricio Jaramillo, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Colombia, as Colombia participates for the first time as a member of the Council in this quarterly session on its peace process. I'm certain that Colombia's own experiences and its dedication to peace will continue to inform and to inspire conflict resolution around the world.
Delegates, since deploying to Colombia in October, the mission under my leadership has implemented the adjustments to the mandate approved in Resolution 2798, adopted by the Security Council that same month, and I have informed the various stakeholders in the peace process about these changes. I can report today that the mission is reorganized accordingly and focused on verifying the implementation of the provisions of the final peace agreement concerning comprehensive rural reform, the reintegration of former combatants, as well as their security and that of communities in conflict-affected regions. Mission structures were changed to focus on these 3 key pillars of work, while discontinuing previous verification tasks on transitional justice, the ethnic chapter, and ceasefire monitoring. As a result of these changes, combined with further streamlining under the UNAT process, the mission goes forward in 2026 with the budget approved by the General Assembly, with nearly 200 fewer posts and a resource reduction of nearly 15 million, or over 17%. Importantly, the mission has retained its essential field presence in conflict-affected regions. We count now on the continued support of the Member States to be able to fully implement the mandate. Over the past 3 months, I have met with key counterparts for the implementation of the peace agreement at the national level and around the country. They highlighted the fundamental importance for achieving peace of the 3 pillars of the refocused mandate of the mission: During visits to departments such as Caquetá, Nariño, Cauca, Valle de Cauca, Norte de Santander, Arauca, and Guaviare, I was struck not only by the immense challenges facing communities in conflict-affected regions, but also by their resilience and determination to achieve a better future. For leaders and members of communities in some Colombia's most remote areas, day-to-day life is hard struggle due to the actions of different illegal armed actors and to the limited presence of the state, public services, and development opportunities. Their courage is inspiring. Governors and mayors, peace signatories, the victims, women's leaders, and representatives of Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities, church officials, private sector leaders, and state officials working to bring peace and development to these regions conveyed to me their confidence in the work of the mission and highlighted the importance of its presence on the ground. I am pleased to report that earlier this week, the mission was once again part of a humanitarian commission that worked with the Ombudsperson and the Catholic Church to facilitate the safe release of 5 members of Colombia's national police who had been seized and held against their will by an armed group in the northeast of the country. Mr. President, members of the Council, the reintegration of former combatants is always essential to the success of peace agreements designed to put an end to internal armed conflicts. Ensuring the transition of former fighters to civilian life is also a security imperative for Colombia's present and future to avoid the recycling of violence. Nevertheless, 9 years after the FARC-EP laid down arms under the peace agreement, the path has proven challenging for the over 11,000 former combatants who remain active in the government's reintegration program. These are men and women living often in remote areas with limited infrastructure, access to markets, and threats to their security. For the authorities, it has also entailed major efforts, both financial and programmatic, to facilitate their transition into civilian life. This is a necessary investment for Colombia, and substantial progress has been achieved. The commitment of the peace signatories, many of them now raising families, is admirable, but much remains to be done. A fish farming cooperative I visited recently in Nariño, a coffee plantation I toured in Cauca, and a livestock farm in Norte de Santander on land acquired from a local rancher are among the many examples of reintegration in action. Nevertheless, the economic sustainability of many of the productive projects launched by former combatants has yet to be secured. Access to land, be it for housing or productive purposes, has progressed but needs to be fully resolved. And security, the greatest concern in many regions, is still fragile. Since laying down their arms, 487 former combatants have been killed. This is an unacceptable attack on peace. I call on the authorities to redouble efforts to investigate these crimes and prioritize security guarantees for peace signatories. Although violence is far lower today than at the height of the armed conflict, the presence of armed groups in areas still affected by conflict continues to inflict suffering on entire communities. A mix of factors is fueling the violence. The limited presence of the state provides fertile ground for the armed groups to exert control and for illicit economies to prevail. The consequences for the civilian population are grave, as detailed again in the latest report of the Secretary General. threats and killings of social leaders, forced displacement and confinement, and an alarming increase in the recruitment and use of children by armed groups. Border areas are particularly complex. The missions team based in the city of Cúcuta on the border with Venezuela is part of the response to continuing clashes between rival armed groups that have forced thousands of civilians to flee their homes in the Catatumbo region, a hub of coca cultivation and cross-border armed activities and criminality. Mr. President, members of the Council, the peace agreement provides a framework which can significantly contribute to addressing many of these problems, particularly its sections on security guarantees, illicit drugs, and rural reform. It offers a much-needed holistic vision by providing for the strengthening of the state's capacity to dismantle criminal structures, to promote alternatives to coca cultivation, and concrete development measures through its comprehensive rural reform. Through its work on security guarantees, the mission will continue to promote protection for vulnerable populations and more effective public policy responses to address the security deficits in conflict-affected regions. The rural reform section of the agreement affords a historic opportunity to address one of the root causes of conflict in Colombia. Its purpose is to resolve a long-overlooked imbalance in land distribution and in the provision of basic goods and services. While moving forward with the reform has been challenging, the delivery of close to 300,000 hectares of land in recent years to peasants, victims, and ethnic peoples is significant progress. Greater efforts are needed to meet the targets set out in the agreement to implement the development programs with the territorial approach, offering peace dividends to rural communities, and to give life to new instruments such as the agrarian jurisdiction established under the agreement to resolve land disputes. These steps require focused attention by the executive as well as by the legislature. Mr. President, as the year begins, I wish to echo the Secretary General's call for all involved to intensify their efforts towards the full implementation of the 2016 peace agreement. In particular, we call upon the current administration to expedite the process as much as possible during the remaining months of its term. Strengthening the government's high-level architecture for implementation as ordered by the Constitutional Court would lay a particularly important foundation for the future. The next government will then shoulder the responsibility of the Colombian state to carry forward an agreement that arrives this year at its 10th anniversary, marking 2/3 of the way along the 15-year timetable envisioned for the implementation. As the country approaches elections, strategies for consolidating peace and security will be part of the debate. Ensuring the security of candidates and voters in conflict-affected regions is crucial. Colombians deserve a safe environment in which to exercise their political rights. The expansion of voting in areas historically affected by conflict, which we witnessed since the signing of the final peace agreement, should be maintained. In parallel, the electoral period brings with it a tendency towards divisiveness, which must be countered with dialogue, respect, and tolerance. The UN system, including the mission, are contributing in this respect through a campaign on fighting hate speech and disinformation. Mr. President, At a time of tensions, both globally and regionally, it is in everyone's interest to secure lasting peace and security in Colombia. The year ahead undoubtedly provides a window to advance peace as a strategic national objective and for Colombia and its partners to engage constructively through dialogue to address shared challenges, notably in the border areas where cooperation on all sides is essential. Colombia has come a long way on the path to peace and security, and the peace agreement provides a solid roadmap to keep moving forward. I trust that the Council will maintain its support and solidarity for this historic peace process and greatly appreciate its confidence in the verification mission. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Janka for his briefings. I now give the floor to the members of the Security Council. I give the floor His Excellency Mr. Mauricio Jaramillo Jasser, the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Su Excelencia.
Your Excellency Abukar Dahir Osman, Permanent Representative of Somalia to the United Nations and President of the Security Council, Mr. Miroslav Jenča, Special Representative of the Secretary-General and Head of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, Excellencies, Permanent Representatives to the Security Council, distinguished delegates. Allow me to begin by thanking the Special Representative, Mr. Miroslav Jenča, for presenting the most recent quarterly report of the verification mission. As the current government approaches the final stretch of its term and at the same time assumes its responsibility as an elected member of this council, Colombia deeply appreciates the balanced, objective and constructive nature of the report presented. This report recognizes significant progress. It identifies persistent challenges and reaffirms a fundamental truth, namely that peace in Colombia can only be consolidated through the full implementation of the 2016 peace agreement, a national aspiration whose benefits transcend our borders and strengthen regional stability and the multilateral system as a whole. Since it was created, the verification mission has been an essential pillar in building trust between the parties and an invaluable asset for multilateralism. In an international context marked by prolonged conflicts, rising tensions and challenges to the multilateral order, the sustained support of this Council for the Colombian peace process demonstrates that multilateralism is not only necessary, but it's also effective. Last November, we commemorated the 9th anniversary of the signing of the 2016 peace agreement, a historic milestone that made it possible to bring to a negotiated close more than 5 decades of armed conflict and to open an unprecedented path towards peace, justice and reconciliation. We thank the United Nations and this Council for their ongoing support to the Colombian people, and we reiterate that this political support must continue to be accompanied by financial resources and technical assistance. These are indispensable for peace to be translated into real change on the ground. Mr. President, the implementation of the 2016 peace agreement is a commitment of the Colombian state and Colombian society to the definitive end to the armed conflict and the construction of stable and lasting peace. For this reason, its implementation is comprehensive, indivisible and structural. Although the verification mission, in accordance with its mandate, focuses on specific areas defined by this Council, the Colombian state implements the agreement in its entirety. In this regard, we welcome that in the quarterly report of the Secretary-General, he underscored that the full implementation of the agreement remains an indispensable condition for bringing about peace, justice, reparation and reconciliation. We also appreciate the efforts undertaken to explore mechanisms that allow aspects such as the ethnic chapter and the restorative sanctions of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace to continue receiving support from the United Nations system, in line with the provisions of Resolution 2798 of 2025. We acknowledge that the recent change to the mission's mandate did not fully satisfy the majority of the members of this Council. We especially would like to thank those states that defended a broad and comprehensive vision of the mandate. Colombia respects the decision adopted and reaffirms its absolute support for the verification mission, whose work remains essential for the stability of the process. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most painful and urgent challenges in the implementation of the agreement is the security of the peace signatories. Since 2016, 487 former combatants have been killed, 45 of them in 2025, which represents a worrying increase compared to 2024. This figure cannot be downplayed. It is a human tragedy, a blow to trust and a structural risk for peace building, and also is a threat to other ongoing peace initiatives. Colombia assumes this reality with self-criticism and responsibility. It is a problem that transcends governments and political circumstances. Within the framework of this Council, it must be addressed as a serious risk to the implementation of the agreement and not as a circumstantial situation of a specific policy. Without security guarantees, there is no effective reintegration nor real guarantees of non-repetition. In this context, during the reporting period, key bodies of the 2016 peace agreement, such as the high-level body, the National Commission on Security Guarantees, and the Monitoring Commission of the Comprehensive Security System for the Exercise of Politics, met regularly and achieved concrete progress. The monitoring instrument for the Strategic Security and Protection Plan was agreed upon with a technical monitoring subcommittee. Coordination of the Committee for Advancing Investigations with the Office of the Attorney General was strengthened. The Tripartite Protection and Security Body addressed electoral and gender-related issues, and the National Commission on Security Guarantees prioritized the dismantling policy in Catatumbo, Magdalena Medio, and Northern Cauca. For its part, reintegration continues to be a central axis of implementation. Nearly 11,000 signatories, equivalent to 89% of accredited signatories, remain active in the comprehensive reintegration route. During the government's current term, substantial progress has been recorded. Access to land for signatories will reach 18,000 hectares, well above the 800 delivered under previous governments. It is projected to finalize with 1,500 housing solutions delivered and under construction, and 106 collective productive projects are being promoted, along with individual initiatives supported by technical, education and subsidized loans, benefiting more than 800 families of reintegrated persons. Likewise, the National Reintegration System begins operations, bringing together 32 state entities. But of course, challenges still persist regarding the economic sustainability of the projects and attention to signatories outside the former territorial spaces. We agree with the Secretary-General's call to translate regulatory progress into sustainable results through greater institutional coordination and investment. We will continue working in that direction. In this context, to guarantee the sustainability of progress, the government is advancing on the creation of an advisory office for the implementation of the peace agreement in compliance with the order of the Constitutional Court. And Colombia is aware of the Council's call in this regard and trusts that it will overcome this issue in the immediate future. Comprehensive rural reform is another structural pillar of the agreement. As of November 2025, access to more than 700,000 hectares has been reported toward the agreed total of 3 million hectares, as well as nearly 1.9 million hectares in land formalization toward the goal of 7 million hectares, strengthening the land fund and progress in land registry, restitution and rural investment. Challenges persist regarding resources, coordination and security, as well as the need to advance the agrarian jurisdiction. No previous government has achieved such substantial progress on land, ultimately one of the structural causes of violence in Colombia. I would like to highlight that the government of President Gustavo Petro secured approval in the Senate of Bill 405 of 2025, which extends the development programs with a territorial focus, PDET, until 2037, guaranteeing continuity of the main public policy for transforming the regions most affected by violence. Driven by the 16 peace seats, this decision ensures sustained investments for more than 5 million inhabitants in one-third of the national territory, with an emphasis on sustainable development, institutional strengthening, and comprehensive implementation of the peace agreement, recognizing that the structural transformation of territories requires time and stability. Mr. President, as a state, Colombia is committed to the comprehensive implementation of the agreement, and therefore we cannot speak of it while overlooking other points. With regard to transitional justice, for example, Colombia reiterates that the Special Jurisdiction for Peace operates in accordance with international standards and, as recognized by this very Council, constitutes an example for the world. During the second half of 2025, the first sentences were issued against those principally responsible in establishing orders aimed at reparation, non-repetition, and the implementation of restorative sanctions. Entities of the national government have continued coordinated work with the JEP in order to prepare the rollout of restorative projects, while the sentences advance through their procedural stages. On the other hand, the ethnic chapter deserves special mention. It represents a historic achievement for indigenous and those of Afro-African descent. Colombia reaffirms its commitment to its implementation and regrets that insecurity continues to disproportionately affect these communities. Colombia has strengthened coordination and monitoring of the ethnic approach as a historic commitment of the Colombian state to indigenous peoples, Black, Afro-Colombian, Raizal, and Palenquero communities, and the Roma people. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, the electoral context with regard to the 2026 elections is decisive for the consolidation of peace. The Colombian state has strengthened electoral security through a comprehensive plan led by the Committee for the Review of Electoral Protection Measures, with participation from the Ministry of the Interior, the Ministry of Defense, the National Police, and the National Protection Unit. The capacity for personal protection has doubled, and real-time monitoring mechanisms have been activated. Likewise, the political participation of women has been strengthened, particularly women leaders running as candidates for the special transitional peace constituencies through training, recommendations to the National Electoral Council to guarantee the political rights of women victims, and the activation of protection routes for women leaders. We reiterate our condemnation of the recruitment and use of children and teenagers. We deeply regret the death of 7 miners in the bombing of Guaviare and recall that the government adopted the operational decision in defense of the troops' lives, deeply lamenting these losses. To conclude, I would like to state that Colombia does not present to this Council a perfect process, but a real process, one with progress, challenges, and lessons learned. And precisely for this reason, the support of the Security Council and the verification mission continues to be indispensable. The Colombian experience demonstrates that peace is a long and demanding path, but one that is possible when there is political will, international support, and a firm commitment to multilateralism. Colombia deeply appreciates the backing of this Council and reiterates its willingness to continue working jointly toward a stable and lasting peace as a contribution to international peace and security. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Jaramillo Jasser for his statement. And now give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me thank Special Representative Yencha for his briefing and commend the UN mission for its continued efforts to support implementation of the 2016 peace agreement. I also welcome Vice Minister Jaramillo to the Council today. Bienvenido. Colleagues, we encourage the Colombian government to use its remaining time in office to drive forward comprehensive implementation of the peace agreement, and to ensure that it passes on to its successor strong institutions that are able to continue delivering on the commitments within it. This includes the Commission for the Follow-up, Promotion and Verification of the Final Peace Agreement, which brings together the high contracting parties to resolve issues in implementation. President, the United Kingdom reaffirms its commitment to the implementation of the 2016 peace agreement as a whole, including its provisions on transitional justice and the ethnic chapter. These remain essential to deliver restorative justice, accountability and reconciliation in line with the expectations of victims, and to ensure that measures taken recognise the disproportionate impact of the conflict on Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities. We hope that the parties will quickly agree a new mechanism to verify the implementation of sanctions mandated by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, now that this responsibility no longer sits with the UN verification mission. Respect for the Special Jurisdiction sentences and sanctions is essential to ensuring public confidence in the agreement's transitional justice mechanism and, by extension, the agreement as a whole. Elections this year represent a key milestone for the country, but come with a heightened risk of violence and intimidation. The UK urges the Government of Colombia to strengthen security guarantees and ensure a safe and inclusive democratic process as set out in the final agreement. 487 former combatants have been killed since the signing of the agreement. We call on all actors to respect the democratic process and protect the civilian population across the country. Targeted violence against signatories, civil society, and other civilians must stop. President, the United Kingdom remains committed to supporting Colombia on its path to lasting peace, and we look forward to working with the Colombian government on this and other issues of international peace and security as a member of this Council over the next 2 years. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary-General for Colombia, Miroslav Jenča, for his report, and we congratulate him on his astute leadership in such a short time at the helm of this important mission. We are convinced that your vast experience will be a guarantee that your work will be successful. We're also happy to acknowledge the presence of Colombia's Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs, Mr. Mauricio Jaramillo Yacir, who honors us today with his presence. And your participation in this meeting is evidence of the fact that Colombia values its commitment to peace. Firstly, Panama believes it appropriate to highlight the concrete progress that has been made in the implementation of the final agreement, particularly in the areas of rural reform and reintegration, as well as the continued commitment of the parties and of the international community to a lasting peace in Colombia. For, as we have mentioned on other occasions, Colombia's peace is Panama's peace and the peace of our entire region. On the other hand, I think we should also mention that the verification mission during the period covered by this report is operating with a reduced mandate at a particularly sensitive time for the verification of the judgments of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, whose focus on victims and reconciliation constitutes a central element of the peace agreement. We trust that this gap may be solved promptly so that the integrity of international support for the peace process is preserved. Likewise, Panama would like to express its concern over the continued killing of individuals who decided to lay down their arms and commit to peace, now totaling, unfortunately, nearly 500, as well as the persistent attacks against social leaders and human rights defenders. These acts not only undermine confidence in the process, but they also send out a troubling message to those who, through concrete actions, have committed to reconciliation. In that regard, it's worth highlighting the positive expansion of the comprehensive program of guarantees for women leaders and human rights defenders, which increased from 16 to 23 departments. And we underscore the importance of its swift implementation and integration into public policy instruments at the local level. We also welcome the efforts of the Agency for Reintegration and Normalization, in particular the implementation of its 12-month strategy aimed at preventing the recruitment and use of girls, boys and teenagers. With respect to security, in light of armed strikes, clashes recorded in various territories and the worsening humanitarian situation, it is essential to underscore the importance of ensuring safe conditions for the electoral process scheduled for the 31st of May of this year. And we're very happy to see the progress that has been made in this regard. We trust that the Colombian people will maintain an unwavering commitment for this process to advance along the path of peace and security, thus avoiding the repetition of deplorable acts, such as the assassination of presidential pre-candidate Miguel Uribe Turbay. In this regard, Panama highlights the fundamental role of the Comprehensive Security System for the Exercise of Politics, CSEP, as a key tool to prevent risks and protect candidates, social leadership and communities. In a context of growing regional uncertainty, working for peace is more urgent than it ever was. Nevertheless, Panama reiterates that all dialogue must take place exclusively with actors who demonstrate a genuine will for peace and without undermining under any circumstances the security of the population. Mr. President, for Panama, the final agreement constitutes a solid roadmap for the consolidation of peace in Colombia, whose scope goes beyond the signatory parties, since it also entails an effective presence of the state in the territories, enabling the protection of the civilian population and guaranteeing communities' right to live in peace. In this effort, a continued focus on those who have historically been excluded and violated, particularly girls and boys, women and those of African descent and indigenous populations, together with the sustained commitment of the Colombian state and a strong and coherent international verification, all of these things will continue to be key to achieving peace in the sisterly Republic of Colombia. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Special Representative Genter for his briefing and welcome Minister Jaramillo to this meeting. In November, Colombia marked the 9th anniversary of the signing of the final peace agreement, bringing an end to half a century of armed conflict between the Colombian government and FARC-EP. The agreement promised a new chapter determined to bring social, economic, and political progress, one which offered a path to healing the deep wounds of conflict. Significant progress has been made in fulfilling this promise. However, more work remains to be done. Allow me to focus on 3 points, Mr. President. First, Denmark welcomes the step taken by the Colombian government to implement the peace agreement. We particularly commend the efforts on rural reform and the significant progress made in land distribution. We call for accelerated efforts to ensure comprehensive rural reform. This includes addressing challenges regarding the allocation of resources, effective institutional coordination, and the mitigation of security risks. Denmark commends the resolve and determination of former combatants who remain committed to the peace agreement. Their reintegration is fundamental, and we call on the government to expedite progress towards access to land, housing, and economic development to ensure the sustainable transition into civilian life. Similarly, efforts to ensure accountability and transitional justice are critical in this regard. We reaffirm our support for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, whose work continues to support redress for victims and build sustainable peace. Second, tackling the persistent violence across the country must be a priority. Violence continues to impact civilians where armed groups have expanded and where state presence remains limited. We are deeply concerned by reports of continued displacements, confinements, and killings of social leaders and former combatants. Afro-Colombian and indigenous peoples remain disproportionately affected. In Catatumbo, communities continue to endure the effects of ongoing disputes between armed groups, as we've heard today. Ensuring security guarantees for these vulnerable communities is urgently required. We call on the government to expand state presence across the country and ensure close coordination among all institutions and entities, including the instruments provided by the peace agreement. Denmark remains particularly alarmed by the continued recruitment and use of children by armed gangs, which is a grave violation of human rights and international humanitarian law. The tragic deaths of 7 children in Guaviare in November underscores the need for the immediate release of all minors from armed groups. The government needs to adopt all necessary precautionary measures during military actions to safeguard the protection of children. Third, as Colombians head to the polls in both congressional and presidential elections, we call on the government to ensure strong security arrangements to safeguard these elections across the country and support the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women. The expansion of electoral participation in conflict-affected areas and the strengthening of security guarantees for political leaders will also be crucial. In closing, Mr. President, as the peace agreement enters its 10th year, we commend the determination of the Colombian people in the pursuit of and commitment to peace. We call on the government to take the concrete actions to consolidate the recent gains made in implementation and to ensure continuity in the next administration and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the briefer for his presentation. We also acknowledge the presence of the new Security Council member, Colombia. Even as President Trump and President Petro engage in productive conversations, we remain deeply concerned about instability, violence, and illicit drug cultivation and trafficking. The Petro administration's approach to negotiations with varied armed groups risks creating perverse incentives. It may encourage violence to improve negotiating leverage and raises serious concerns about impunity for terrorism and other grave crimes. The violence and drug trafficking perpetuated by these armed groups, if left unchecked, can spread. It will jeopardize the safety of Colombians, everyone in the region, and certainly of Americans. We urge the government of Colombia to prioritize addressing this threat. The United States is alarmed by the rise in the forced recruitment of children by narco-terrorist organizations and urges the Colombian government to uphold its responsibility on the protection of children and security for all of its citizens. The Secretary General's report documents how a failed security strategy characterized by a near halt to cocoa eradication caused a surge in cocoa cultivation and cocaine production. This allows illegal armed groups to consolidate their reign of terror across much of the country. In 2024, Colombia reportedly reached a record 261,000 hectares of cocoa cultivation and a cocaine production of 3,001 metric tons. These groups cause an acute humanitarian crisis and perpetuate serious abuses against civilians, including forced displacement, confinement, sexual violence, and the recruitment and use of children in combat. The Colombian government's policies not only failed to stem this worsening security environment, but have in fact facilitated it. Colombia's experiments to pause combat operations and curb cocoa eradication while pursuing talks and ceasefires with multiple armed groups emboldens these groups and improves their negotiating positions. In 3 years, the number of armed combatants and their accomplices grew by more than 40%, according to international observers. Civilians suffer the consequences. There are bright spots. We are heartened by President Petro's warning to the ELN of military action if they are not serious about pursuing peace. History shows that peace deals require credible threats of military force. We urge Colombia to prioritize confronting the violence and terror conducted by these groups and to guarantee security and justice for their victims. We condemn those who undermine peace through narco-trafficking and terrorist activity. In December, we designated another one of these groups active in Colombia, Clan del Golfo, as a foreign terrorist organization, cutting off the group's access to funding and resources. There must be no impunity for acts of terror or violence by these illegal armed groups. As Colombia approaches national elections later this year, we further underscore that political violence has no place in a democratic society. We are alarmed that illegal armed groups took control of territory and declared armed strikes against the civilian population as recently as December 13th. According to Colombia's ombudsman, measures that violate international humanitarian law could threaten the integrity of the upcoming 2026 national electoral process. The assassination of Senator and presidential candidate Miguel Uribe is a reminder that much work remains to be done to achieve a peaceful and secure Colombia. We continue to call on Colombian authorities to identify and bring justice to the perpetrators of this attack on Colombia's democracy. Although we continue to have concerns, the United States is pleased that the verification mission has narrowed its focus to prioritize urgent security issues. We also continue to urge the government of Colombia to prioritize addressing the security threats from terrorist and drug trafficking cartels. The United States supports real peace and justice in Colombia, and our relationships with the Colombian people and their institutions are strong and enduring. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席
President, I thank Special Representative Yencha for his briefing. I welcome the presence of Deputy Foreign Minister Jaramillo of Colombia at today's meeting. Thanks to the joint efforts of the government and people of Colombia, the implementation of the 2016 peace agreement has registered positive progress, setting an example for world peace. The Colombian peace process has now entered a critical stage, consolidating existing gains and striving for new ones. We require determination, unity, cooperation, and persistence on the part of all stakeholders in order to implement the final agreement and achieve peace and development on the ground. I would like to share the following observations. First, the peace agreement must be fully implemented. The ESG's report points out that Colombia's final peace agreement is a comprehensive accord that should be implemented in its entirety if its promise of peace, justice, and reconciliation is to be fully realized. China supports the Colombian government in strengthening coordination, mobilizing more resources, and taking more concrete actions across all aspects of the agreement, including rule reform, DDR, security guarantees, and transitional justice, with a view to achieving more visible results. Second, national development must continue to advance. The Colombian peace process must advance in tandem with peace building and sustainable development. China welcomes the government's continued efforts in advancing land reform and development of programs such as rural connectivity and electrification. We also welcome the continued support for formal competence in access to land and housing, employment, and community reintegration, among others. We hope that Colombia will optimize resource allocation, enhance institutional coordination, and continuously unleash development dividends in order to promote peace through development and eliminate the root causes of conflict. Third, a secure environment must be guaranteed. The deadly clashes that took place recently in Colombia's central and southern departments demonstrate that the security situation in some parts of the country remains fragile. China supports the Colombian government in strengthening security deployment in conflict-affected regions and protects its citizens, including vulnerable groups such as former combatants, ethnic minorities, women, and children, so as to create conditions for a smooth and secure general election later this year. China supports the Colombian government in advancing peace talks with rebel armed groups. We hope that all parties in Colombia will prioritize the future of the country and the well-being of its people, strengthen unity, and jointly safeguard the hard-won peace. Fourth, international support must be sustained and scaled up. As the Colombian government and people continue their pursuit for peace and development, the international community should maintain its support and assistance. China appreciates the important role played by the UN verification mission under the leadership of SRSG Yencha in supporting the Colombian peace process. China supports the mission's continued fulfillment of its mandate and calls on other UN entities as well as international and regional partners to scale up their programs on the ground and jointly promote the Colombian-led and owned peace process. President, in recent years, China-CELAC relations have entered a new stage marked by equality, mutual benefit, innovation, openness, and benefit for the people, setting a sterling example for South-South cooperation. China stands ready to join hands with Colombia and other countries in the region to promote solidarity, development, civilization, peace, and people-to-people connectivity, and advance shared development and revitalization. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, and my own country, Liberia. We welcome the presence of His Excellency, the distinguished Vice Minister of Colombia, and thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for his insightful briefing. We commend the SRSG, together with the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, for their continued dedication and professionalism in supporting Colombia's peace process. We also appreciate his leadership and reported engagement with national authorities, former combatants, civil society, and international partners. Additionally, the A3 commends the government and the people of Colombia for their steadfast commitment to implementing the 2016 final peace agreement, marking 2026 the 10-year anniversary of its signing. This milestone is a moment not only to reflect on the progress, but also to renew and strengthen efforts to consolidate peace, advance reconciliation, and deepen inclusive dialogue and international cooperation. While acknowledging the complex challenges that continue to affect implementation, the A3 remains confident that the final peace agreement provides a solid and comprehensive foundation for lasting peace, justice, and inclusive development. We recognize the progress achieved in key areas, including political participation, reintegration, rural reform, and the strengthening of institutional frameworks. As Colombia approaches a critical electoral period ahead of the 2026 congressional and presidential elections, we encourage continued efforts to translate political commitments into tangible and timely results that benefit communities across the country and further consolidate trust in the peace process. Mr. President, the A3 welcomes the ongoing role of the Commission for the follow-up, promotion, and verification of the final agreement, and we value its contribution to strengthening coordination, dialogue, and the joint oversight of implementation. Such mechanisms remain essential to sustaining momentum and addressing remaining gaps in a collaborative manner. We acknowledge the government's continued prioritization of comprehensive rural reform as a cornerstone of peace building. Progress in land distribution, land formalization, peasant reserve zones, and territorial development initiatives reflects a clear commitment to addressing the root causes of conflict and promoting equitable development in historically marginalized regions. We particularly welcome the extension of the PDET timeframe to 2037, which provides a stronger basis for long-term transformation. At the same time, we encourage continued efforts to enhance institutional coordination, mobilize adequate resources, and advance key legislative measures, including those related to the agrarian jurisdiction, to further accelerate implementation and ensure legal certainty for rural communities and land beneficiaries. The A3 welcomes the steady progress made in the reintegration of former combatants, including advances in access to land, housing, and productive projects in former territorial areas for training and reintegration. We encourage sustained support for reintegration efforts nationwide, including for former combatants residing outside these areas, to ensure that reintegration is inclusive, sustainable, and firmly anchored in local development and reconciliation. Mr. President, the A3 notes with concern the continued security challenges in certain conflict-affected regions. We nevertheless acknowledge the efforts undertaken by the Colombian authorities to strengthen prevention, protection, and coordination mechanisms. We encourage the continued use of the security instruments established under the final agreement, including the comprehensive security system for the exercise of politics to safeguard civilians, social leaders, former combatants, and candidates during the electoral period. We condemn the recruitment and use of children by illegal armed groups and express deep concern over recent incidents affecting children. We welcome commitments made by some armed groups to end this practice and encourage their full and verifiable implementation. And we do this alongside our hope to see strengthened prevention and protection measures by the state. The A3 takes note of ongoing peace and socio-legal dialogues and welcomes confidence-building measures, including the release of persons held in captivity, commitments to non-interference in elections, and the destruction of war material. These steps contribute to reducing violence and building trust. And we encourage continued dialogue focused on humanitarian outcomes and the rights of victims. Mr. President, the A3 welcomes progress in advancing the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, including recent legal and policy measures that strengthen the implementation of Resolution 1325. We encourage continued efforts to ensure that these advances translate into improved security participation and leadership opportunities for women, including women leaders and women former combatants, particularly in conflict-affected areas and during the electoral process. We commend the strong coordination between the United Nations Verification Mission and the United Nations Country Team, as well as the continued support of international partners. Such cooperation remains vital in advancing rural reform, supporting victims, promoting mine action, and delivering durable solutions for internally displaced persons. To conclude, Mr. President, the A3 reaffirms its firm support for the government and people of Colombia in their pursuit of lasting peace and stability. We commend the work of the United Nations Verification Mission and encourage all stakeholders to sustain their commitment, cooperation, and shared responsibility for the full and effective implementation of the final peace agreement. Peace in Colombia stands as a national achievement with regional and global significance. The A3 remains in solidarity with Colombia as it continues on this path toward reconciliation, inclusive development, and a peaceful future for all its people. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Liberia for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Mr. Miroslav Janša for his briefing and extend my felicitations to him for taking over as the SRSG on Colombia. Pakistan fully supports and commends the UN verification mission's efforts in assisting the Colombian government in the implementation of the peace agreement, including through its critical presence on the ground in different parts of the country, as per the mandate authorized by this Council. I also welcome Vice Minister Mauricio Jaramillo of Colombia in today's meeting. President, forged by and for the Colombians, Pakistan views the 2016 agreement as Colombia's sovereign journey to heal its wounds and the nation's decisive turn from a traumatic past to a peaceful, progressive, and prosperous future for all Colombians. Pakistan fully supports Colombia and its people in this endeavor and for the full implementation of the 2016 final peace agreement across all its chapters. We acknowledge the challenging domestic environment faced by Colombia in the implementation of the peace plan and its efforts to build peace. We commend all parties to the agreement for their steadfastness and sustained commitment to these efforts, which is indispensable for lasting stability. Full and comprehensive implementation of the peace plan would not only help extend state presence in areas where challenges remain, but will also reassure the people facing such challenges. We support Colombia for its continued focus on and progress in rural reforms, reintegration of former combatants in a sustainable manner, creation of opportunities to earn livelihood, and continued efforts to reinforce protection measures despite challenges. Mr. President, as we have heard today, security and associated challenges in certain regions are concerning. Continued violence and targeting of ex-combatants, social leaders, and human rights defenders by armed groups is condemnable. We also strongly condemn attacks by armed groups targeting state security forces and urge all armed actors to renounce violence and fully respect Colombia's national laws. We support Colombian government's efforts to strengthen security, especially as it prepares for the upcoming electoral cycle in the country. To conclude, we strongly encourage all parties to maintain this vital momentum and continue the peace-building process with full, sustainable, and integrated implementation of the peace agreement, to transform the promise of peace and hope for a better future into a tangible reality for all Colombians. Towards this end, Pakistan would continue to support all efforts, including those made by the Council and under the auspices of the UN, to help Colombia achieve its objective of peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank our SG Miroslav Jenča for his comprehensive briefing. We welcome Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs of Colombia, Mr. Mauricio Jaramillo Yasir, to this meeting. Mr. President, reflecting on the latest Secretary General report and developments in Colombia, I would like to make 3 points. First, in 2016, Colombia chose the path to peace. Almost 10 years ago, approximately 13,000 former combatants decided to lay down weapons and enter the peace process backed by international community. We should never forget the complex circumstances surrounding this historical milestone and what it has meant for Colombia and its people. Today, due to its comprehensive, transformative, and inclusive nature, the peace agreement continues to serve as a legitimate framework for building long-lasting peace and progress in Colombia. Throughout the years of implementation, the peace agreement has generated strong legislative backing and significant normative basis that has enabled the initiation of diverse structural reforms in Colombia, including rural reform, reintegration, and promotion of gender equality. Going forward, effective and sustained implementation remains the key. Latvia supports the commitment of the Colombian government to continue the full implementation of the peace agreement and underscores the importance of ensuring continuity of this process, regardless of the complexities of the national political landscape. Second, while we commend the progress made in the implementation of the final agreement, we acknowledge the persisting challenges, including the ongoing violence of armed groups in conflict-affected areas and the alarming surge in the recruitment of children by such groups. According to UNICEF, the recruitment of children by armed groups has increased by 300% during the past 5 years. This development is deeply alarming. Such abuse of children constitutes grave violation of human rights and international humanitarian law. The airstrikes of November 2025 that killed 7 children who had been forcibly recruited by armed groups in Colombia tragically illustrates both the lethal capacity and the technical sophistication of the illegal actors and the scale of coordination required to respond effectively to this challenge. Therefore, we urge the Colombian government to strengthen the presence of state institutions and public services in the conflict-affected areas and to protect the civilians from armed group violence and the devastating impact of organized crimes in these regions. Third, as Colombia approaches parliamentary and presidential elections, we commend the planned participation of international election observers. At the same time, to ensure safe and inclusive participation of diverse civic stakeholders in political processes and decision-making, we encourage Colombian government to provide all the necessary security measures and protection mechanisms for electoral process and participants, particularly for vulnerable groups in the conflict-related areas, women leaders, human rights defenders, indigenous people, Afro-Colombian communities, and former combatants, as foreseen in the peace agreement. In conclusion, Mr. President, I would like to reaffirm that Latvia will continue to provide its full support to the UN verification mission in Colombia in its endeavors to implement the mandate in accordance with Security Council's Resolution 2798. We underscore that the mission's role remains essential to assist Colombia in building lasting peace and reconciliation for all Colombians. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, Mr. President. We thank Miroslav Janša for the briefing on the situation in Colombia. We welcome the participation in today's meeting of the Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs, Mauricio Jaramillo, and his detailed briefing on the situation of the implementation of the final agreement on peace and the government's plans for making progress in this direction. The final agreement recently marked its 9th anniversary. Its signatories and all of Colombian society expected that upon the expiration of this time, the key tracks, benchmarks, and concrete results would be attained, that the ex-combatants would be safely reintegrated into civilian life, that farmers and conflict victims would receive the promised land plots, that justice would prevail, and that there would be maximum accountability for perpetrators of crimes in accordance with the national transitional justice mechanisms. Unfortunately, the journey of Colombian peacebuilding is not yet over. We are not casting doubt on the commitment of the current Colombian administration to full implementation of the agreement. Tangible progress has been achieved in a number of areas, which is clear if one merely compares areas of formalized and distributed land plots under the agrarian reform under President Petro and his predecessors. There remains full trust in the work of the Transitional Special Jurisdiction, with its judicious approach to consideration and weighing and adopting of decisions on genuinely complex cases encompassing decades of domestic armed conflict, thousands of subjects, and tens of thousands of victims. We regret the fact that the UN verification mission in Colombia, at the whim of one member of the Security Council, was stripped of the mandate to verify compliance with the sentences of the special jurisdiction, which is one of the most topical elements of the implementation of the agreement at the present time. Moreover, we wish to draw particular attention to what is likely the most acute issue related to implementation of the final agreement, the status of its signatories who are former ex-FARC combatants. The situation related to their safety remains, and this is no exaggeration, appalling. There is an ongoing effective execution by fire of these individuals, these former combatants who officially laid down weapons and entered civilian life. Nearly 500 have perished over the 9 years of the implementation of the agreement. That is one person dying each week, and this is all taking place with utter impunity. Only 10% at most of these crimes have been elucidated. It is clear that while this tragic phenomenon persists, the full-fledged reintegration of former combatants is not possible. Ultimately, facing threats to their lives, stigma, and unemployment, many former FARC combatants are simply losing faith in the peace agreements, and they are even considering taking up weapons once again. Such a result would spell the collapse of the final agreement, and Bogota, with the support of the international community and the Security Council, should do their utmost to preserve participation of 11,000 ex-combatants in the peace-building process. Otherwise, the likelihood that armed groups who remain rampant in the country reaching agreement with the authorities, this likelihood would tend towards zero. For now, we are observing how the illegal armed groups who up until recently were in dialogue with the government, including the ELN and the Estado Mayor Central, today increasingly are included in reports of terrorist attacks and armed attacks. Their growing activity is generating grave concern, and the measures of the government to establish order and to extend state authority in conflict-affected regions are more needed now than ever before. Mr. President, in connection with the upcoming electoral period and the imminent transfer of power in Colombia, I wish to emphasize the following. Regardless of the outcome of the elections, implementation of the final agreement must remain a constant in Colombian state policy. A historical agreement which is enshrined in the Security Council resolution, and the opportunity to attain national reconciliation must be safeguarded. the Colombian government will continue to be assisted by the UN verification mission under the leadership of Miroslav Jenča. We are confident we'll continue to deliver objective assistance for the long-term priorities of the country and its people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Secretary General for his report in December regarding the situation in Colombia. I would also like to thank Mr. Miroslav Jenča, the Special Representative of the Secretary General in Colombia and the head of the UN verification mission there, for his briefing and for his efforts. I welcome also His Excellency Mr. Mauricio Jaramillo, Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs of Colombia. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the Secretary General's report on Colombia, which reflects the progress made in implementing the final peace agreement, especially regarding efforts towards comprehensive rural reform, reintegration, security and protection, considering these as positive steps that must be built upon. The Kingdom underscores the importance of continuing efforts in the area of transitional justice, rural development, and sustained investment in sustainable development in ways that contribute to achieving security, stability, and prosperity in Colombia. We would also like to commend the efforts of the UN verification mission and its effective role in following up on the implementation of the final peace agreement, monitoring progress in rural areas, assessing the development of infrastructure, and coordinating with relevant parties in support of transitional justice, as well as working with the concerned entities to halt violence, promote calm, and encourage dialogue in order to ensure the success of the elections scheduled to be held this year. The Kingdom of Bahrain values the role of the State of Qatar in hosting and facilitating the rounds of mediation between the Colombian government and the concerned parties. It affirms the importance of concerted efforts by all parties and the international community to ensure the implementation of the agreement's provisions, including accelerating agrarian reform, integrating marginalized groups, protecting civilians, and ensuring the sustainability of international financial and technical support for the peace process. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms the importance of the verification mission in Colombia, continuing its tasks in an objective and balanced manner that achieves security, stability, and sustainable development. The Kingdom also expresses its support for the efforts of the government and people of Colombia in achieving peace and stability. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I first and foremost wish to thank the Special Representative, Miroslav Jenča, for his briefing and for his efforts since he has assumed his duties. I also wish to welcome His Excellency, the Vice Minister, Mauricio Jaramillo. His presence is an opportunity to convey to him and to Colombia our very best wishes and our full support. As Colombia is entering an electoral period, there's a need for us more than ever before to unite our efforts in order to surmount the myriad challenges for the restoration of peace, of justice, and reconciliation to become a full reality and a lasting reality. The Colombian people have the right to hope. And then the Colombian people in 2016 demonstrated the fact that it is possible to end years of conflict through dialogue and negotiation. Colombia's entry into the Security Council this month is an opportunity for us to build upon this unique experience in terms of conflict resolution. The Colombian example reflects the robust desire of the stakeholders and is an important reflection of the support of the Council. And we wish to take this opportunity to reiterate our support to the Special Representative and to the verification mission. There have been changes introduced in October last. Streamlining measures have been adopted, and we wish to voice our confidence in the ability to fully discharge the mission. Mr. President, in order to make this stabilizing and peace-building efforts a reality over the long term, Colombia has a unique mechanism, the 2016 agreement, the full implementation of the agreement is the best way to tackle the root causes of the persistent imbalances. And I wish to emphasize the following points in particular. First of all, rural reform is key. There is a need to address the inequalities which result in violence in the country, and for this reason, France consistently provides real support in this area. And number two, reintegration and security guarantees for ex-combatants. Progress in this regard is key to avoid any attempts at rearmament and in order to prompt other armed groups to engage in the path towards demobilization. Transitional justice. It remains a pillar for national reconciliation, and the integrity thereof needs to be preserved through, in particular, the implementation of the sentences. Mr. President, there is a need for two conditions to be met to generate new life for the implementation of the peace agreement. The first is the extension of state authority over all of the territory and the reduction of violence in the country. The two conditions, state authority and violence reduction, are inextricably linked. The dismantling of armed groups and organized crime networks requires that there be assistance and presence of all institutional forces of the Colombian state, including in the most remote areas, and in order to protect indigenous communities in particular who are disproportionately being affected by this violence. France stands in solidarity with Colombia in its path towards reconstruction, applauds the courage of the Colombian security forces as they fight against this violence fueled by trafficking in drugs and illegal gold mining, and they are paying with their lives for these efforts. France believes that there's a need for the Council to continue to monitor the situation on the ground with vigilance and determination in order to demonstrate to the Colombian people that the international community is committed by their side on the eve of key elections. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Mr. President, I would like to thank Special Representative Miroslav Jenča for his briefing and wish him once more all the best in the new role that he officially assumed in October. Asimismo, saludo y doy la bienvenida.
I'd also like to welcome His Excellency Mauricio Jaramillo Yasir, Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs.
Its unwavering support for the SRSG and the UN verification mission in Colombia, and appreciates the organizational adjustments and streamlining efforts which ensure the mission's continued operational effectiveness. As we welcome the renewal of its mandate, we stress the importance of the mission's sustained long-term verification of the provisions of the final agreement related to security guarantees, the reintegration of ex-combatants, and rural reform. At the same time, we encourage Colombian authorities to continue focusing on the full implementation of the agreement, including the ethnic chapter and transitional justice as they enter the final period of their administration. Greece fully supports Colombia's final peace agreement as a comprehensive framework for national reconciliation and commends the progress achieved primarily in land distribution and the reintegration of ex-combatants. In view of the above, I would like to make the following 3 points. Firstly, we appreciate the achievements with regard to access to land and to promotion of development projects in conflict-affected areas. At the same time, we encourage Colombian authorities to expedite land adjudication and restitution. We believe that comprehensive rural reform should go hand in hand with the reintegration of ex-combatants to provide them with sustainable alternatives to illicit economic activities. Furthermore, improving security conditions on the ground by enhancing state presence and providing security guarantees remain critical to ensuring ex-combatants' transition to civilian life and laying the foundations for local development and community reconciliation. Secondly, We remain concerned by the continuing violence in regions where state presence is limited, and we denounce the killings of and human rights violations and abuses that occurred during the reporting period, particularly the forced recruitment of children by armed groups and the violence targeting women leaders and ex-combatants. We are confident that the recent decree elevating Colombia's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security to a binding instrument will significantly bolster peace-building efforts. Thirdly, as Colombia enters a critical electoral period, we reiterate our call for free, fair and safe elections, prioritizing the security of all candidates and facilitating the full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation of women in the electoral process. In this regard, we appreciate the agreements reached with various armed groups to refrain from violence or interference in the upcoming elections. Mr. President, in concluding, Greece reiterates its commitment to a Colombian-led and Colombian-owned peace process. Anchored in the final peace agreement, this remains the only viable way to address the structural causes of the conflict and redress historic injustices and inequalities. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I'll now invite the members to the informal consultation to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.